how you see this as a problem. And did anyone die? What was the format of it? Like, let's really look at, like, is it a cultural issue? Was it just a family issue? Was it a community issue? Like, what plays into it? Because it all expands into so many other things that it could have been or it might develop into. Essentially, what we do is, I worked in wilderness therapy for 17 years, okay? And I know some of you are probably familiar with wilderness therapy or know someone that's gone or has sent a child to a program. The reason I bring it up a lot for myself is because most families who go through a wilderness therapy program, most, not all, but the majority, come out with this godlike image of their wilderness therapist, for example. There's no other professional in the world than our wilderness therapist. I can't tell you how many times I've heard statements like that to the process of the change that happened through that type of program. And what's amazing to me is that when I look at that, and I was that wilderness therapist, okay? But when I look at that scenario, I had to start breaking it down of why are we being held on this pedestal? And for me, I created this company because, to me, I found what was missing. And what was missing is that out there in the world, there are programs that specialize in taking kids and young adults who are struggling with mental and behavioral issues and creating a scenario of change. And then we release them back into the wild. But while they were in that program, amazing things would happen. Deep therapeutic contexts would happen, interventions would happen, behavioral change would happen. All of these things would happen in 12 weeks or less. And for most people, we look at that and go, 12 weeks or less, that's like a magic pill. You can take us from this to this with just 12 weeks, and it's really a miracle. What it really is, and I'm going to be honest with you as I get into this and as you get to know me in the future, etc., is there's a process to this where I'm going to tell you the truth, and that gets me in a lot of trouble. There are programs and staff and therapists out in the world that really don't like us because we come in and say, okay, we're going to educate you. And that was the missing piece, is we would bring them into environments where I had the advantage that I got to train a team of people to work with your child. And they did everything I told them to. When your child punched the wall, they were trained in how to handle that. They were able to build rapport, not destroy it, step in and keep the kids safe and have it build actual relationship from a really intense situation. They were able to talk and communicate in ways that they had no idea how to do until they showed up and we taught them how to do it. So when I went through my career and I got to the point where I started this company and I started to assemble my team, I want you to know that I'm here tonight literally just coming to say our job and what we do is we train families to work with children and young adults. We give you the secret weapons that the programs have and say this is how you use it, and then provide the structure and support around that for your training, where eventually the end result is that you don't need us anymore either, because you know how to intervene. You know how to communicate and set up interventions and plans for behaviors. Because guess what? A kid's going to go through a cycle, always. So they can go up into something that's really intense. They start a behavioral pattern, for example, stealing money. Great. All right, they're stealing money. Now what? Most parents get into a place where they look at consequences, and that's all they try to do, and they start reading all the parenting books. And if you Google parenting into Amazon, into their site, you're going to get what? 3,000-4,000 books? Good luck. Because what I found, and the reason we do this work now, is that parents can read all the books they want. But then when you put them in the room with their kid that's freaking out, and say, okay, can you de-escalate them and make them calm? That parent goes, oh, no. I read the books, but I don't know how to do it. So if you know nothing else about myself and my organization, know that that's what we do. We teach parents and organizations now what to do. We're training police officers, dentists, we're training teachers. We're going into places and being like, okay, what you used to do was this, let's learn 5 new ways to handle this. So tonight, I wanted to create an introduction to your community, because more and more I'm finding connections where families are like, okay, this is what we're going through, but they feel completely hopeless because they've read the books and everything they try fails. And a part of that is that the structure is what's missing. The skill and how to say what you read is missing. And how do humans learn? Usually from each other. You know, you can read all you want, until you practice it and create a system, you're going to miss something through that process. So tonight I'm here to give you a brief introduction to my world, answer some questions and give you some basics, and then to offer it to you for questions and answers about maybe what you're going through or what you might want to get some background on, etc. But the end result is this, is that we're available to come help families. We fly worldwide. The furthest clients I've gone to are in France. Great trip. But we go everywhere because families are everywhere and they're struggling. We're going to also talk a little bit about resource management, in the sense that what we run into is that some people are like, well, we can't afford wilderness therapy. Guess what? You may not need wilderness therapy. You may need something though, because as I'm going to show you, wilderness is not treatment. And I hope that doesn't shock some of you too hard to the core, because you might have a kid in wilderness, I don't know. But I'm going to explain what all of this is really about and allow you to step into this world a little bit and ask some questions. So I want to start with the continuum of care, because for most people, wherever they are, with a kid in treatment or a kid that they're like, oh my God, what do we do? You know, you're just starting saying, we're having an issue. This child is having an issue. What do we do? The continuum of care is an unofficial way that most professionals in our industry look at the situation that a family is in with a child. And it's all about looking at, well, where are they and what services do they need? And you mentioned the consultant that you worked with. This is kind of their job. They step in, and the beauty about a lot of the consultants we work with is that the ones that are doing their job really well are stepping into a process where they go, okay, we get to know the family, we get to know the dynamics of the family, and we get to know the kid, okay? So from that, we get into the place where the consultants of the individuals just, their job is they fly all over and they go to the programs and visit them. And I'm not talking about like, hi, what do you do? Oh, you serve adults with ADHD. Great, bye. They go in and they interview every clinical director, therapist, they meet the staff, they find out what's happening, etc. So in case no one knows what they do, that's what they do, is that when they meet a family, they're like, this program, this therapist, this process. And they start to really hone it down. Because for us, some of the worst situations we've ever come into is finding the families that Googled, help me, and then they sent their kid. And I say that, and I hope you see my face, because there are a lot of situations that don't end well, because there are programs out there, in our world we call them kid farms. That's all they are. They take in your kid, and they say, we're helping them, and then they come out a year later and $100,000 later and go, oh, your kid's unfixable. Something's wrong. It must be your fault because we're perfect. There's all these kind of scenarios that play out. So in our world, we meet families in any context. A lot of the times they're working with consultants already to say, where are we? But I want to give you this kind of structure of what this looks like. So we're looking at a continuum of care where a family will come in and say, okay, this is what we're dealing with. We have a 12-year-old and they are acting out in this way, and this way, and they just will not listen to us. There's just no communication happening in this. And oftentimes that's where the school's already involved, right? Community organizations are involved. There might be therapists involved. Like families are starting to throw things at the problem, okay? So at the beginning of the continuum, this is where we find, okay, the kid is at home. And as far as the care continuum, this is where we really see a focus where the parents are just like, okay, let's do equine therapy. And let's go from 1 day a month of or 1 hour a week of therapy to 2 hours a week of therapy. And they just start stacking things on here. So we come in, and this is where we're like, okay, the question is it working? Is the behavior changing? Is it getting better? Where are we in the process of identifying, is the kid responding to what you created? Okay? So moving from home, that's when we get into boarding schools. And this is where I want to be specific. I'm talking about traditional boarding schools. You are living over there. There's no therapist. There's the kids go off campus. They're eating at Hardee's and McDonald's and all these places. They have a life and they just live there. So this is a very cultural aspect to a lot of families. It's very normalized where you don't live at home, you live here. And this is where, when we start seeing problems there, the boarding school is starting to step in and go to the parents and say, if your kid doesn't change, they're out. So we're okay. So we're at home, that's not working. A lot of these kids will go to a boarding school to attempt a different structure and a different setting. Then we get into, sorry, this thing's going to fall over eventually during this talk. Then we get into TBS, which is therapeutic boarding school. Okay? What I want to point out, because this is where a lot of people start to go, wait a minute, hold on. Where's wilderness? This is not where wilderness is. What we're looking at here is the continuum where down here, this is a functional family system. Okay, so this is, they don't need a lot of help. There's no behavior continuing, any patterns developing, all of these things. So as we move across in the level of care recommended for changing and working with kids and looking at like, okay, how do we get this to change? The therapeutic boarding schools are really focused on the process of holding and treatment. And that's a very important word, okay? Because the TDS bleeds over into another world, and this world is RTCs. And that's Residential Treatment Center. The difference between a therapeutic boarding school and a residential treatment center is that a therapeutic boarding school is a lot about relationship. There's some freedoms, but not total freedom. There's therapists, they're doing therapy, they're really focused on trying to build relationships. There's a lot of family processes that happen here where the parents come in and they're doing family weekends and intensives and all this process. The residential treatment centers, the big difference is this is the higher level of care where there's therapists, but there's also psychiatrists and other professionals doing medication management and all these different systems. But this is also where you get into a lot of tricky territory because there's sometimes a hospital element to it. Some of these programs do have, we'll call them lockdown rooms, the padded rooms that if your kid's freaking out, you go into the room. But not all of them. It's a continuum. So you'll see that over here, there are RTCs that look like therapeutic boarding schools, okay? Because they're on this lower end of the spectrum. From there, from the RTCs, we're getting into the next area. This is wilderness. Wilderness therapy is therapy, but here's the trick to understand about it. This is about stabilization, not treatment. Yes, when we do research, you can look at the Outdoor Behavioral Health Council and all the research that's gone into wilderness in the last 30 years. Wilderness therapy is usually 10 to 12 weeks long, equals out to 1 to 2 years of talk therapy. Okay? Very intensive, very stabilizing process. The beauty, like I was describing, is this works, honestly, because every staff there was specifically trained to deal with your child. So it's a very intensive, we can falsify this environment in wilderness, you can create a scenario to make that child blow. And they're in the middle of the woods. They're not going to break anything. They're not going to hurt themselves. We're keeping it very safe and therapeutic in those programs where we can do a lot in that time because it's all fake. And the world that they're in is all natural consequences. One of my favorite stories is the kid that I worked with years and years and years ago where he came in and he's like, "Oh, really? You can't keep me here?" And he took out his sleeping bag and threw it in the rain. And we're like, "So what's the plan here?" And the kid's like, "Well, you have to bring me in a new sleeping bag." And we went, "How long did it take you to drive when you came out to the field?" And they were like, "I don't know, like maybe 4 or 5 hours. It's getting dark." It's a natural consequence, and it's in that area where that kid went out and he got his sleeping bag, and he brought it in his fire, and he dried it off, and he went to bed. This is an advantage you as families don't have. But here's the beautiful part. When we get into therapeutic boarding schools, even residential treatment centers, into wilderness programs, you're going to see some of the most qualified, highly trained staff and therapists in the world. Because these programs are taking a specific population of kid usually and saying, okay, we take the ADHD kids. That's us over here. And that program's in North Carolina. Then you come over here and you go, oh, well, you guys are the ADHD kids. We're going to be the sex offender kids. That's in Colorado. Over here, we're the trauma kids. We deal with trauma, especially adoption and trauma. That's in, 3 locations now. They're expanding. But the point is that programs in the last several years, wilderness programs and therapeutic boarding schools have started to specialize. It used to be, 25 years ago, every wilderness program was about the same. We all busted fire, with bow drills and sets. We all camped outside. We all drank the same water. In the last 20 years, it's shifted dramatically, where now you can pick your state, your location, and your specialty you're looking for, which is where the consultants come in, where when they identify, it's like this one. And that's the beauty of it, is we can actually create significant change in a family system and in a child, but through that process. So wilderness is stabilization, which is why therapeutic boarding schools often refuse to accept a child who has not gone through this first. Because here's the beauty of it. You have a child who does true introspective work and stabilizes in their change model, meaning they make the decision of, I am not happy living that way. I'm going to change this. That child steps into boarding school and they go, I get it. I don't like it. Right? I don't like it. I don't like it. Let me say that again. I don't like this. Get me out. But internally, they show up in that respect of, I get it. I made all these decisions, and I get why I'm here. I've got work to do. And then, like I said, these programs have significant family systems work to try to do it. But again, the reason my company exists is because even a lot of these schools and programs, some of them have really good family components. Okay? A lot of them do a really good family therapy. And then you read parallel process. So you do family therapy, and you read parallel process, and then they go, good luck! Because with HIPAA laws, this is a therapeutic program. So this kid comes home from wilderness, now what? Sorry, we're done. We were your therapist. Good luck. So where's the skill for the family? And that's where we come into this spectrum. So we meet families along this entire spectrum and train them in. So for example, if there's not money for wilderness, what do? We build a home program. We design a wilderness program at home, and the staff are the parents. Because here's the thing, and I'm just being honest, this is an opinion, not a professional opinion. It's my opinion, so please understand that. My opinion is this: you can throw money at it all you want. You can hire as many people as you want to come into your home. But until you know how to do it, it's not going to change. So the teachers know how to do it in the school, not going to change. So the police officers know, not going to change. about training. It's all about training. So if you have an issue you start to see in the kid, it's not the kid's problem. It's not the kid's problem. The problem is because you're the parent on the outside going, what are you thinking? That's the problem. Not saying, what are you thinking? The problem is that now you're moving into conflict. And in conflict in your relationship, it's just going to get worse. Because you don't know what to do. And if you don't know what to do, it doesn't change. So, to finish this continuum as we look at it, I want to say that up here, this range, this is where rehab is. Rehab is all ages, teenagers, young adults, etc. It follows the same kind of like, okay, we need a residential type center to wilderness therapy that focuses on rehab. That's in southern Utah. So we're really looking at this process of where is the individual, because it comes down to you, usually as parents, when I do this in trainings with parents, what we usually find is that parents don't like to look beyond this. They're scared of beyond this. Because beyond this, we get to jail and long-term care. This is hospitals. Most hospital stays are not long-term, they're assessment-based. They're going to come in 30 days, again, not really treatment. They'll call it treatment, but it's about stabilization, which is why it overlaps with wilderness. They're all just trying to like, okay, let's make a suicide plan and good luck. Like hospitals are not designed for long-term. Long-term care is where we get into, you go to court, you take away their rights when they turn adults, and you put them into a permanent facility where they're with someone through that process. Jail is an obvious lead-in to behaviors that aren't curved, and they start to cross that line. And this can be any number of things. You know, I have kids who have gone to jail for carrying an ounce of pot, to kids that were drug dealers, full on, right? And it's all about where did they come through this system or not get intervention through this system. And then the final part of our continuum that we consider is how close is this person to death. It's a very real possibility that we don't want to hide from, because most people don't want to look at this and say this is where this could go, but it depends on the behaviors and the shifts that happen as you go through this continuum. So my organization, and the reason that we're here and that we're helping families all over the world, is to look at this scenario and go, okay, where are you? And for a lot of families where they're even trying to decide what do we do, sometimes they come over here and go, oh, well, we've really only tried these two things. What if we shifted? So the third thing becomes the parents change in the home. They create a home program. Their language shifts. The structure of the family shifts. There's so much that can be done back here. When you get into this, however, it starts a stepping system where statistically, as you look through these processes, when you send a kid to wilderness therapy, whether they're a young adult or a kid, every system errs on the side of caution. I want to say that. Usually, across the entire industry, there's somewhere around an 80% correlation of the recommendation to go to boarding school or residential treatment after wilderness. The reason is because wilderness can't come to you at the end and go, we fixed them! Here you go. What we can say is, they went from here to here in their progress. And there's steps that they need to learn. They have to learn this as they go forward. And that's where, when they send to therapeutic boarding schools, that's where they come in as the design. They were built. These didn't used to exist. Wilderness was the start of that, where boarding schools were having issues, so they split and they became. You'll find a lot of boarding school, therapeutic boarding schools that have a combination of founders from both worlds 25 years ago. And now there's, I'm going to say 50 real therapeutic boarding schools in the country that I know of. I don't know them, as with consultants before, but I know of them, and we work with a lot of them. Then we get into wilderness programs, and I'm going to say there's 20 that are, I'm going to say, valid in the sense that they provide a really solid structure and service through the therapeutic process. But again, stabilization, this is where treatment really happens in the realm of like working with professionals. And then boarding school and home, this is a scenario where, okay, that kid's stepping either back into that system, the home system, or they never had to go because this is where the shift happened. So when you look at this, the reason I try to educate communities and people about it is this is the conversation you're entering into, okay? If you have resources to reach out to intervention and strategies, great. If you don't, the beauty is it's the same thing. If you're at home and you're going to create a home program, usually the first step is to create an intervention, a transitional moment in that kid's life where everything before this is before, and everything after this day is the new family. You have to redefine for them in that transitional moment. So it's about building the experience of what that might look like. And there's any number of things that can be. Sometimes it's you're going to go live with these friends for 3 months over the summer. Okay? Because to the kid it's like, oh, something's changing. So we engage that process. That's just one example. But this is how we build the understanding of, okay, this is all about the hero's journey, going off and doing something very hard, learning about yourself, intervening, stabilizing, taking you out of what you know, where all those problems exist, into a brand new scenario where it's like, I have no idea what's happening. And we engage the change process very rapidly. So it's about taking this concept and either doing it here or saying, we're beyond that already. And if you're beyond that already, this is what our industry is going to use to look at and say, okay, well, where are we? Because there are some therapeutic boarding schools that would enroll a kid where it's like, okay, they need some help, but it's not that bad. Here we go. And then, like I said, there's others that they specialize in things, but they say absolutely not until they complete wilderness criteria. So it really depends on what you're looking for and where you are in that process.
Can I say something real quick,
Yep.
Robert, about our journey and the continuum, which I didn't understand until I went through this. We went through this as my husband Alan, with Robert, is that it's not a straight line. It's very much a back and forth, all around line.
Yeah.
And so where we really had Robert help us is when we were trying to figure out if we were going to take Nathan back from wilderness to here, or we were really going to send him to a place where he is now, which is a hybrid model of a therapeutic boarding school. It's not actually, it's kind of like a little blip in the middle. So where he's in a therapeutic home, but he goes to a public school. So it's what we call a hybrid model. But, you know, if you ever have to entertain the parts to the right of this whole thing, that's where, you know, our ed consultant then becomes the person that works with Robert, or actually refers Robert, because they have totally different functions. So I guess that's the part I just want to kind of highlight. You know, Robert helped us. He came into our house. He worked with us for 2 days. And, you know, through his recommendations, we like completely restructured our furniture. You know, we painted walls. We did a bunch of different things to change, because what we realized is that our trigger zone was our foyers, like our places where outside of bedrooms and outside of hallways. So like working in this capacity helped us redefine what some of our issues were within even our home space. So I just wanted to clarify that, like, that's where all this comes into play, is like where you have to jump around trying to figure out what works best.
Yes. So, switching, well, actually, let me open it. Are there any questions about this?
Can you speak a little bit to people kids are aging out? Like, what would that look like for kids who are 18 or older?
It's the same. So once we get to 17, 18, 19 years old, young adult status, etc., same system. It's a check mark of where are they in this. The difference is how you approach them. So my organization, we train parents to develop interventions. Kind of like the TV show,
Everyone asks that, but not really. It's more, how do you get your kid to engage in admitting that this is not working? Their life, school, alcohol, drugs, whatever it is. We have to identify what the core issues are, and then the parents engage in the change process. A lot of it is planting seeds over sometimes days, leading up to the actual intervention, but getting that child in the place of looking at it and go, I understand my options, and this is what I'm going to do. Okay, and that can be different for every family. For some families, it's you can go to treatment or you cannot live here. That's sometimes the most extreme. Okay, but that's the whole thing, is that sometimes that's where parents have to get to with the young adults. I have a wonderful, it ended up wonderful, but it was a really interesting scenario with a parent that the kid, they got everything into place. The kid was 19 years old, living in the basement, playing video games, refusing to do anything with their life. I'm not capable, failure to lunch is what you'll see in books, et cetera, is what it's called. But they built the intervention, and the parents went to him and said, you have this treatment program you can go to, or you can go to the homeless shelter. And the kid looked at him and was like, oh yeah, I'll take the homeless shelter. And a part of it, and we'll go through this in a training if you work with us or do calls with us, a part of it is being okay with whatever they decide. That's your work. And sticking to it. Yeah, that's right, the consistency. But here's the beautiful part. In this scenario, this kid went to the homeless shelter. And he got to the homeless shelter and he waited 3 hours and he called home and said, you ready to come get me yet? And this mother, God bless her, because it was her work, not his work, her work. She got on that phone and said, I love you. I'm not coming to get you. Click. The next morning, he called back and said, are you ready to come get me? He said, I love you. I'm not coming to get you. Figure out your life. Click. She did this for 6 days. By the end of 6 days, he came to their house and knocked on the door and was like, I can't get into my apartment. And basically they changed the locks. It was part of the plan. And they said, you don't live here anymore. This mother, I can't express to you the amount of energy it took for her to do this. This was her work. She said, you don't live here anymore. He was in his treatment program 2 days later. From the homeless shelter, from their house, from the homeless shelter, he went to treatment, went through the wilderness program, came out, and immediately was like, oh, well, I did my wilderness, so I get to come home now, right? His mother said, no, you don't live here anymore. So he went, well, what am I supposed to do? And he said, whatever you want. So the kid got a job and got an apartment and lived with roommates. And now he is a computer programmer. Because they did their job. They did their work in creating the plan and going through it. And it's that whole process of they went from here to here and then stepped him back into a place of, we will support you, but this is what it will look like and you don't live here. And those boundaries drive us in our neurosystems to change and develop. So we had to engage that for this kid. I can give you lots of stories. Any other questions about that? Yes.
I have a question. I know you take this in the spirit in which it's intended, but
Yes.
I think I'm quite interested. Obviously, my domain is the home domain.
Yes.
And I think you're right that people do kind of throw things. That's the phrase you use. Try lots of things. I've seen that many times.
Yes.
And I understand it as a parent. You just want to do the best for your kid.
Yes.
But I also think that there are available resources and ways of structuring those resources
Yes.
at home. And I know you probably agree with that.
Absolutely.
And the other thing I wanted to say is that, and I'm sure you'll address this, but a lot of what you talk about is like things being done to kids. And it sounds like intervention on a kid, but I think what we've come to see so much is that unless you address the family system and address, for example, parents' trauma, or,
Yes.
you know, the what's really at the heart of why the situation is, So is that part of your
Yes.
thinking as well?
Yes,
Because
it is.
I actually, we start working with kids and we find out that actually the people that need the help are not the children.
Yes, oh, absolutely.
And
That's what I'm saying, when I'm talking about this mother, for example, where it's like she's doing her work, that was it. The kid was stuck in a pattern. It wasn't his problem, he loved his life. He'd gladly be in that basement playing games as long as they would let him.
But I'm even thinking behind that. It's
Yes.
like what led to that? What is for example, what might be the trauma that led the parents to the situation where
Correct.
the kid was sitting in the
Yeah,
basement?
and that's a part of it.
Okay.
It's looking into the training element, because it's, forgive me if that word comes across, it's not about doing two, it's about structure.
Okay.
It's about creating here's our plan, because so often the issue is that parents don't have a plan. They're winging it. Or they're just playing their trauma pattern from when they were a kid over and over and over again, expecting a different result. But they're just repeating history. They're just doing the exact same thing to their child. One of the beautiful things about our work is we focus a lot on the brain. We educate parents about the brain of their children and of themselves. Because you're absolutely right. I've had lots of kids in wilderness where I was their wilderness therapist, and I'm going to give my opinion. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. And then the parents came. And it's heartbreaking. It really is. And I don't want to put that out as guilt on any parent. I just want you to understand that you are right. It's a big part of this training where we dissect your life, not your kids. Because wherever you're coming from, that's where your kids came from. Wherever you're coming from is where your kids came from. You parented. One of my sayings, and I'm going to put on a bumper sticker, is there's no bad parent. There's no bad parent. There's only a parent that knows how they parent. And it fits into this box. And for me, what that is okay, so you're not a bad parent, you're just doing exactly what you were taught to do as a child. You watched your parents and your grandparents and your aunts and uncles, and you gathered data of this is what you say when a kid does this. And well, some of us had fathers that were raging. They raged. Or maybe they had drug issues themselves. Maybe we had mothers who were bipolar. Right? We look at these developmental patterns and say, oh, the way I handled my daughter's freak out, oh my God, I become my mom. We all do that. I am a father. I have a 6-year-old daughter at home. I've also raised hundreds of teenagers throughout my career. And it's an interesting thing to look at, because in wilderness, for example, one of the things we talk about when we train staff is you will meet your nemesis. They're on their way. Because staff are like, oh, I got this. Da, 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 here we go. And then they come. It took me 4 years. And my nemesis walked into the program, destroyed me in 15 minutes. 15 minutes with this kid. And I was a wreck. He pressed every button exactly how it needed to be. And I wanted to quit. I was an emotional wreck. But then stepping through it and working with my trainers and working with my wilderness therapists that I was on their team, etc., it steps into that place where it's like, so Rob, what is it about you that bothers you so much about him? Just think about that question. What is it about you that bothers you so much about him? Because it's not about him. It's not about her. It's about dissecting and looking at where do we come from, and then restructuring, learning a new way. Part of this is when our training model, what we're looking for is, okay, when she does this, I do this. Great, we're not going to do that anymore. Instead, we're going to come over here and say, she's going to do this, because guess what? She's going to do it again. If she has a pattern that she's developing, she's going to do it again. So if she does this, here are 5 different ways we can handle this. Our hope is to never say, this is the way, the truth, and the light. Do it like this and everything will be great. That's not true. It's not true. What is true is there are 5, 10, 15, 20 different ways that you can handle this situation to create a new outcome. And that's what we want to teach.
Does that answer?
Mhm.
Okay. Yep.
Can you also talk about a little bit how you work with families with divorce situations? Like,
Yeah, co-parenting situations. It depends on the situation. To start, in a lot of co-parenting situations, the parents can't be in the same room with each other. So what we end up doing for most of them is 2 separate trainings focused on bringing together a co-parenting plan where they both can agree, and we negotiate that process between the two, and then we try to hold both accountable to following the same plan in the different homes. So we'll work through that, and then sometimes we will do calls for weeks in advance with both, getting the parents on the same call, leading to a point where they find an agreement that they both love their kid, which is usually the central point. They both love their kid, so they will actually come to the same room and do it together. And we mediate that process through the training. So it really depends on the level of what that looks like. But in creating the plans, every family's different. You all have different religions, belief systems, fathers, mothers that taught you whatever patterns you have. And then your children are coming from different areas. Okay, so some kids, for whatever reason, and I'm not here to debate where it comes from, but they start to have symptoms of autism. Okay, what do you do about that? How do you work with a kid with autism? You know, and develop the skill to do so, and to learn to understand it. And I read all the books, but this is what you do with this kid to build rapport and develop structure and all the different things, etc. Then there's going to be the kid that was adopted and has a traumatic past. That's completely different. So the skills are rooted in what we call the foundation of, here's the base that we use in programs. This is what we teach people how to do, is how to work from this base and then develop, this kid needs this. How do we build that? How do we design it? How do we give it to them and support them through that process of change?
So I have a question then, as it relates to Georgina's question. So let's say you have 3 pieces of the puzzle, so your child and 2 parents who are now separated or divorced. And let's say one part of the puzzle or 2 pieces believe, yes, we should be working collaboratively to fix and understand how we can come together, but one piece doesn't really see the big picture or want to participate in maybe some ownership. How do you bridge that, and how, have you come across that?
It depends on which piece, honestly. So what it is like if you're talking about one of the parents.
Yes.
If one of the parents isn't going to engage, we work with the other parent to create a plan of how to use that to their advantage.
Okay.
And there is a way to do that. You can absolutely, if you want to call it manipulation, fine. The point is that through language and structure, working with a kid, you can develop a higher level of function with your kid without the other partner participating, without sabotaging that relationship, by the way. I'm not talking about like using it against them. It's about building in your language and context. What's really interesting though is over time, that kid who starts to learn from the skill will start to use those skills, the other parent.
With that parent. Okay.
Yes. There's also been situations, honestly, we have one this weekend. There's a family in California that one of my team is flying to work with, and the consultant called us and said, I'm referring this family to you, but the dad's never gonna hire you, ever. And I was like, great, challenge accepted. And what happened was, is in my engagement with him to get him to sign up with us, I played off the pride. Okay, so there's an element to this where I understand that this father has a pattern. Turns out that he learned from his father, and over the phone he engaged to go through that process and figure out what's blocking you from being willing to do this. So sometimes we're very surprised by the they would never do this, and then through this process, because the same skills that we work on with kids work with all humans. It doesn't matter your age. It's about engaging in a process where you show up authentically. So I'm going to tell you that you might think it's impossible. It doesn't mean it won't happen.
That's true.
Other questions?
Can you speak to the low resource
Yes.
issue?
Yep. Okay, so First of all, our organization scholarships. Okay, so we have a price range that we work with for families all over the world, and then from there we work with all families in situations to try to make it functional for us to get to them and help them. Okay, so first off, we're a resource for that, where families have called and said, this is all we have, what can you do? Other situations are building into where a community says, we need help with this, and we show up and do a big group training. So the cost is split amongst everyone. We can look for agencies that help support that financially, things like that. So that's just us. But moving into the idea of resources, what it becomes is looking at your community differently. And I say that because a lot of parents, they've tried this therapist, and they've tried this therapist, and they tried this therapist, and they tried this psychologist, and they tried this, and they tried this, and they tried all of these things, and they just keep marking it off the list. But as you were saying earlier, there's an element of it about structuring it where the pieces are all communicating and holding together. So it's about reaching out and saying, okay, what, let's say 3 pieces do we need to target this behavioral challenge? The answer is not always a therapist. Let me be clear about that. The answer is not always a therapist. The answer is usually figuring out, okay, this is what's going on for this child's brain. This is the triggering element to it. Here's what's happening in the family dynamic. Here's the past trauma, like putting those pieces together and then saying, okay, if we were going to build something with 3 pieces, so reaching out to your organization, okay, and saying, okay, well, what do you do? And how do we build that foundation where it's like, we're going to put these pieces together, whether with us or not, it doesn't matter. I'm just explaining that it's about looking at, from our educational standpoint, so you've learned about your kids, you have an understanding, they went to a therapist, they probably had a diagnosis, like you have a basic package. This is what we're working on. So now we engage, okay, the parents are going to do this, one thing. Parents are going to do this. We're going to change all the furniture in the house and work on the brain development aspects of it, etc. And change our language, and we're going to learn this new technique. We're going to have family meetings. Like, this is our family structure. Then the kid's going to have this. So sometimes it's not the therapist, right? It's not going to a therapist once a week, etc. Maybe this is, okay, the kid's going to start an internship. They're 12 years old, and they're going to go and they're going to start learning how to work with dogs, okay, with this dog trainer. And a lot of people have challenged professionals in the past where they're like, well, that's not therapy. Well, in reality, for this kid, the dog might be the most impactful thing you could possibly do. And then having them learn to teach the dog something corresponds to their ability to change too. It's not about therapy, it's about community. It's about taking these elements and putting the pieces together. Where then the third piece comes in and says, okay, well, if it's the family changing, adding in the mentor or the internship or this element, and then maybe the third is an educational plan. Okay? And this comes into me for collaborative problem solving. If you don't know what that is, please Google Dr. Green, and you'll find a lot of YouTube videos. He explains it, he's got books and things like that. But it comes into this element where in education and in family dynamics and all those things, we start to see this process where you can either come at a problem and say, this kid, should be doing so well in English, and they just don't care. This kid doesn't care about English, so they're not going to pass English. That is the old paradigm of, okay, I'm going to make this kid want to pass English. So you'll get $50 if you pass English. You'll be grounded for a month if you fail English. We look at consequences. That's the old paradigm. The new paradigm that most programs use, and they don't necessarily tell you that, is called collaborative problem solving. And that's not the consequence, it's the relationship. Where instead you show up and go, this kid isn't passing English. I wonder why. Dr. Green explains it in the sense that if you're in the old paradigm, your entire job is to make this kid want to pass English. What if you're wrong? What if there's something in their way? Learning disability or a developmental issue. or maybe their parents are fighting at home and getting divorced. Maybe there's just all this kind of stuff, and they really do wanna. They're just overloaded. And then you come over here, and it's like, okay, in this arena, our job is completely different. In this arena of working with this child, it's a focus on, okay, something's in this child's way. My job isn't to make them want to pass English. My job is to find out what it is. Because if we find out what it is, we can do something about that. So there's all these plans that you build just in the home, in the process of putting it together and identifying each individual piece. So it's a partnership approach through developing this plan, whether you do it with an organization or do it with a therapist or do it with us, whatever it is, it's the breakdown of, okay, we are committed to changing what we are doing. Step one. Notice I put that first. Because my metaphor is really based on this. If the parent and the kid, if this family dynamic, if we metaphorically say that is Monopoly, we've been playing Monopoly for years, and our kid's so good at Monopoly, she gets whatever she wants. There's not a lot of consequences. Maybe she doesn't listen to us. Whatever the result, it's because we've been playing Monopoly for so long. The metaphor is this. If that kid comes home from school and walks in the door, and you go, "Hi, welcome home. We're playing Uno now." They go, "Oh, no. You have to play Monopoly with me. Play Monopoly with me." And they actually panic. There's an element of change to this, that intervention I talked about, right? Of, whoa, everything's changing, what's going on? But the one universal thing about humans, and I say this pretty heavily, the one universal thing about humans, not just children, is that all humans want to win. We want to survive, we want to win. So if you're over here going, "Oh no, I'm not playing Monopoly, I'm playing Uno. This is Uno. This is how we behave and talk now. This is how we do this. This is how we change this," etc. And the kid's over here going, "I don't want to do that." What you'll start to see is they start going, "What are you doing? What are you doing? Can I do that?" And they do one part, and then they do the next part, and the next part, and you see an entire culture shift happen in the family or the community. So it's all about developing this plan, and it doesn't have to be resource intensive.
So in a scenario like that, is that make a change, is that something that typically is done in collaboration with the kids or do they go away for the weekend, they come home, houses reorganized, games different?
It can be either way. Sometimes the kids are engaged and they're creative in their process where it's like, okay, we're changing everything. What do you want to change? I want to paint my room. They go and they paint their room and they create this new environment, like everything's changing. Everything's changing. And other times it's much more impactful where you're a little farther down the scale and we need to bring this back. Because the one thing every kid pays attention to is significant change. So they go away for the weekend, come home, and your house is a completely different color, and the living room's turned around, and these are extreme examples, but you create change. We're engaging the mirror neurons of the brain to initiate a level of panic that's appropriate to something that's different. So they start paying attention to the process, and then you're different. The most extreme example of this, and this was a very high resource family, but it's really mind-blowing to me, is that we went through this from Wilderness, kids coming home, I told you this story, kids coming home, and they're like, okay, so what do we need to do? And the Wilderness therapist said, so change the house. They literally bought the house next door and moved into it and brought the kid home. All in like a week. And we had no idea. So the Wilderness therapists, they're like doing the graduation, and the parents are like, yeah, we moved and everything's there. And it's like, you moved? And they're like, well, you told us to. It's like, whoa, hold on a second. That's not what I said. But that's the idea of like the shock and awe to the system of like, okay, this kid's coming into something new. It offers an opportunity for change.
I just want to point out that on the end, there is also a bright shining light. It's not jail and theft. I mean, that could be like the far spectrum of it. But if you make the changes, or they go to a residential treatment center, and not only the kid does the work, but the family does the work, and you have a
Yes.
good home team in place when they do come home.
Right,
And
that's
you-
this.
Then you've done that, so you've lined that up.
Right.
So you've got things to fall back on, you've got a good system in place.
Yes.
Then the end could be a very successful.
Right, well, no, to be clear, what we're talking about, like Georgina was saying, is this isn't a straight line.
Yeah.
What this is something's happening, wait a minute, what are you doing? Hello? Panic, you know, parents are usually at the point of like, oh my God, like they have no idea what to do when they get about here. And then it gets into, we need help. But that's the whole thing, is once kids go to wilderness, for example, the success rate is extreme. Where what happens is the kid comes back, whether home or boarding school, it doesn't matter, but they come back this continuum and they start creating steps. This first, then this, then this. And you're right, with that home team, I mean, that's part of what we do is as transitions. We get that family ready where they come home, boom. And now we're over here, and this is your version of normal. And my whole thing is there's not normal. There never will be a normal. You will
But you're
not
better-
reach
you're
this
better
nirvana.
equipped.
That's correct, and that's what we're looking at here. Is
And you're
when you're working your way back here, your kid is coming back to what we would call a normalized experience. You know, they're in high school again. They're meeting with their kids. They're getting drunk every now and then, maybe. You know, it's not I'm the perfect angel. It's I'm a normal kid in a family system where we communicate and we talk through problems and we have a system to deal with my trauma and we have this and we have that. Like we have all these pieces now. That's the success of this. It isn't we start here and we end there. It's okay, where are we? What intervention corresponds to that? And we're coming back. So this is the lasso. Get them, bring them back. It's the same here, by the way. I know I'm drawing it 1, 2, 3, but if we extended this home longer, this is the, okay, we need a plan. They're going this way. How do we bring them back? And that's creating that, okay, this, and this, and we're going to all correspond with each other.
I think that's an important point, because in the cases where it doesn't seem to work, whatever intervention is taken, and it's usually on the far right side of that board, if you just drop it there and you haven't done the work and made the transition plans, it doesn't seem to have a
That is correct.
staying power at all.
That is correct.
And we know from experience, if you're going to invest in this in all ways, you want to see it through.
Yes. So, I'm starting to understand, but in Aspen there are organizations that probably have flexibility to support specific situations where it's this, and this. Okay? So, if you are a parent where you're like, oh my God, what do we do? You know, maybe that's us, or one of my team's gonna come in and we're gonna teach you this is what you're gonna do as a parent. Then you're gonna look into, okay, what can this organization do that builds in the second piece? And then that organization is the third, but there also has to be that communication, that holding together of, we're all in alignment for this. But I also don't wanna be clear, we're not bringing them to prison. We're not creating something where they're coming back, or we're building something at home where we're boxing them in. That's actually counterproductive. What we're looking for is we're gonna break the box and look at this one kid and say, what does this one kid need to move forward? Not the rest of them, not the normal kids, you know, whatever you wanna call it, and look at, and however you judge yourselves or whatever that looks like. It's about breaking through those judgments and saying, okay, this kid, this family, this unit, this is what we're going to do. Bringing it out.
I think I would add to that actually, because I think, I mean, I've seen situations transitioning back. First of all, everyone has to end up at home, and you're always going to be home. Your family is your family, your home is your home, right? At some point, I mean, unless you're in an extreme case,
Yeah.
you're going to come home, right? At some point.
Right. Well,
and
that,
then,
yes.
and then home isn't just your family, you know. I feel like home is
Community.
your friends, you know,
Mhm.
or absence of friends, or
Absolutely.
your patterns, old different ways of being, you know, how people saw you.
Yes.
I think it's very challenging. It's,
Absolutely.
yeah.
That's what,
Break it.
yeah, once you get back over here, there isn't a utopia. There's just a,
I mean, you
We're-
could move next
we're-
door and that wouldn't address
right.
it,
Exactly.
to your point.
Right, but there are things that we can do to mitigate and make it a new experience. Coming home means something in the transitional phase of someone's life. You know, what does it mean to come home? Because they are walking into the same old patterns, they're being triggered in that, but then that's the whole like, oh, I expected that, but that doesn't have to be our reality. We learned as a family to be different. I have this group of friends and we're all different. You know, that's the whole thing is that teenagers often believe I'm going to have this group of friends for the rest of my life. How many of you are still best friends with your best friend from high school? Statistically, very low, but possible. But the point is you create change in all the systems and you can have change. It's all about building.
So I have a question. So how often do you go in and work with community/schools? Because when I was going through the panic stage, and now I have a son who's in Wilderness, he's been there for 2 weeks. But before I got into this roadmap was totally foreign. Now it's become unfortunately very familiar.
Yes.
But I feel as though it would have been nice to have had maybe additional support and recognition within this very small community that is experiencing a very high incidence of wilderness, therapeutic boarding school, and so
Yes.
on. It's disproportionate. And even though it's happening with a higher rate of frequency in this small town, I was still, it took me a long time to be able to find my consultant, to find a family. It was an acquaintance that I bumped to in the post office who said, something's wrong. And literally she told me about a friend's child who went to
Yes.
Wilderness in Hawaii. And that's how I got here,
Yes.
which I'm thankful for. But I feel like the only place I feel like we can start is within
Yes.
our schools.
So, to answer that question of
Sorry,
how
I-
often
this is
are we
very
doing
long.
this, I'll start there. It's growing. Okay,
Right,
so
it's so
right
hard.
now, it's really hard. Like I said, I'm not gonna lie to you, there's a lot of politics involved. A lot of schools, they talk to us, and some have engaged us. We go in, we work with the teachers, and train them in a lot of skills we teach parents about how to engage positively, because we're not teaching restraints and all that kind of stuff. It's like, no, let's do this 5 other different ways. Let's take it into that level. So some schools are doing that, some are not. And then it gets into the politics of like, everybody thinks they're right, and then some people are really anti-wilderness, and some people are like, wilderness, woo! Like, it really depends on who you talk to and where you are and going through that. So what I'm gonna say is I was invited here by Georgina to come talk. And like I said, this is just the first step for me that I hope where the community is gonna start saying, this is what we need, how do we build it? And we'll gladly build it with you. You know, we're working with organizations in Oregon and Utah and lots of programs now, because programs are moving from the old paradigm of transition being the like, we did a great job here, to, okay, we did a great job, how do we get that to stick here at the home? What do parents need to know, et cetera? Because like I said, a lot of the programs, amazing therapy, you really know how you feel with your son or with your daughter, whoever it is. Like, you really know that feeling, wow, and maybe you've resolved a lot of things. But then it's that whole like, okay, here he is.
Well, I think also within our school system, it's the focus on the issue at hand
Right.
and not recognizing, or even maybe bringing it to the parents' awareness that something's going on.
Yes. So what
Yes,
I'm gonna
chicken
tell
may
you
be smoking pot,
with
but-
our,
Yeah.
sorry, with our organization and wilderness programs, et cetera, we talk at conferences a lot about this. And what it really comes down to is word of mouth. No matter what we do, it always comes down to the parent at the post office saying, my kid went here, call this consultant. And it's really how our world was designed. And then you get into like, there's 2 California school districts now that will pay for wilderness. They had so many kids go.
Right, because
The
I
school
feel like
system
we're,
pays for wilderness.
we're having a slight brain drain of
Right.
sorts.
So that's the whole thing is to answer your question, the answer is we're trying really hard to reach out and say, hey world, because we used to be very isolated in wilderness where all this really grew, okay? Where the model of working with kids in this way grew in wilderness therapy because it was such a unique environment. So we got to test all the theories of therapy and find out what works and what doesn't work. So the element of that is we're trying really hard now. We have national organizations. We lobby Congress every year. We are working with insurance companies to get them to pay for more and more and more of these services, et cetera. But the reality is that my hope is what's going to happen is after today, one of you are going to call me and say, we want help. Let's do this. And then somebody else is going to tell another family, they're going to say, we don't want to wait. Let's do this now. Okay, so we're here. We don't want to go. We don't want to go that way. How do we turn this around? And that's where we get in, where eventually what happens is the school district says, okay, let's do a teacher training and a resource training where everyone in the school knows, like, okay, this is what we're watching for, this is how we can work with it. And here we're going to talk to these parents, because by the way, there's 3 organizations that scholarship kids to wilderness programs. You apply, and they pay for wilderness. Usually up to 50%, 60, 70%, sometimes, etc. But that's the whole thing is once you know, you know. So you start working through it.
We have the resources to be able to pool whatever is required.
Right. I won't lie, Aspen's one of the unique zones. I talk about this in our trainings. In wilderness, we have marketing strategies, trying to find families. And there are what we call red zones. Aspen's one of them. Aspen, San Francisco, Chicago, New York City. There's a hot pocket outside of Newark, New Jersey.
And what is it related to?
That's a dangerous question.
I know.
Because you're asking me for something where I could try to give you a lot of the information, but it really comes down to a couple of things. In our work, we talk a lot about community culture, family culture, where the parents learn to be parents and then pass that on and develop systems. Because what we're really dealing with is that their parents raised them and they survived and everything ended up fine. And now, in the last 20 years, I want you to just think about all the things your kids are dealing with in school that you never had to deal with when you were in school. Everything from technology use to drugs and availability of drugs to social media and the impacts of anxiety and depression from comparing yourself to the world. Suicide rates, being aware of suicide. That's the difference. It's back then, a kid in the next town killed themselves, you didn't find out about it. It wasn't in the paper, it wasn't right. Now it's like the kid killed themselves within an hour. Everyone in that state knows that it happened through social media and broadcasting and all these different things. So we're really dealing with a completely new paradigm. So those parenting techniques are ineffective. Sorry, I'm gonna be blunt. They're ineffective. And a lot of it has to do with not that you have a bad kid or that there's even anything wrong with your kid. Let me be clear about that. I'm not saying there's something wrong with your kid. What we're saying is your kid is struggling in this world over here. There's a way to meet them there. And if you can do it in the home, great. And if they are already moving down, great. Get them the treatment, bring them back. But you need to learn how to hold that container when they do get home. Because the goal is everyone comes home, at least for most of us.
Let me also state why I asked Robert to come. Obviously I've been working with him and it's expanding a little bit, but it's about kind of creating a supplemental idea around what exists here already. There are phenomenal resources.
Yeah.
And 3 of the organizations who representatives aren't here tonight for various reasons, but they're very interested, which is why I'm recording it. So there is a lot of interest within the community to try to help support in all ways. And I give so much credit to Catherine and Aspen Family Connections for being kind of like, if you want to talk about container, like a way of looking at that container and how it is that all these resources. can be used and accessed. So, this was my need to be able to take it one step further. And that's kind of the conversation I have as an education consultant. I'm sorry, I'm an advocate. I refer out. And when I refer out, I'm also referring straight over here. So it's not just to Robert, it's not just to my ed consultant or anybody else. It's really trying to think about what the best fit is for whatever I'm hearing. So that's what I've kind of morphed into.
Yeah. And there are, your organization, I'm learning more and more about, like, the resources you have in Aspen are astounding.
Mm-hmm.
The question is how do you allocate those resources, or who do you tap into, and is it a good fit or not, or et cetera, but to use that system and to communicate where all the pieces are coming together. And then ultimately, like for me.
It's so overwhelming to jump into that world, and then
Yes.
I almost, not that it would ever, but for a minute, you are that parent that's like, well, that school looks pretty good online, or that might be okay,
Yep.
and then you're like, wait a minute,
Yes.
this, and then anyway, so it's just like, wow, this whole sea
Yes.
is so
Yeah.
unreal.
And I want you to give yourself a break. If you've never seen this before, you had no idea. Remember, there's no bad parent. There's just a parent that knows what they know. Then you learn something new.
Right.
This is just that thing where right now you're looking at this going, oh my God, I understand so many segments of this. And hopefully this also completes a part of the picture where it's like, oh, this is why I'm doing this. Okay? This is why I'm creating this. This is why I'm willing to change everything about how we eat dinner together. This is why I'm willing to move next door. This is why I'm, etc. It's because you love them. The issue is that you can love your kids to death. If your patterns are driving the patterns that are driving the patterns, so it's their patterns and their issues, because some kids do have a lot of emotional distress, anxiety disorders, things that develop for whatever reason, whether it's you believe in the chemical sensitivity element to kids, vaccines, whatever it is, they grow into their brain. And then you have your brain, and those two brains interact, whether you like it or not. What that creates is up to both of you. Because what you do creates a result. What they do creates a result. The question is do you start a loop where now you're just living, for example, where every day they come home from school and you scream at each other for an hour, and then you have dinner and you go to bed. It's a true story. That was the entire family dynamic. And then when it was broken down, what it became was screaming is the only way I know how to let them know I care. That was the pattern of the parent. And the kid was a great screamer. Played Monopoly their whole life with their parent. They were really good at this element. But as soon as you took them away from the parents, we just get into the world. And then in the element of training the parents in a different way to respond after wilderness and bringing the two together, the system has been changing. So it's all about your work, their work, creating a combination of that, and then utilizing whatever resources to push that person, push that kid to develop in new ways. Changing your paradigm of what you consider success is huge.
So what's the success rate, in your opinion, of a therapist's one-on-one work with a child? When you're
It
hitting...
depends.
Okay. So
It's all based on
very-
relationship and
The
your
child and the therapist.
Motivation too, right? Would you
Yeah.
say?
Oh, so many factors.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
That's two very
I was going to pick up on something you said, which I think is important, and I'm not here to defend the school or any particular school. Actually, not part of the school really, but I think we all hope as parents that the schools are going to do things. I feel that sometimes schools are there to teach kids academics, and I would like to see so much more, and I think there are movements, but that's hard, and I don't see
Yes.
many schools
Yes.
where they really are able to address sort of social emotional issues in any depth or sufficient depth, and that really it goes back to the family. It always goes back to the family.
Always.
And I'm not
agree
criticizing your
1,000%.
judgment,
The thing is,
Yep.
I agree with you, and now that we've entered this process, there's so many things that we could have done differently,
Of course.
Right.
It's become,
Right.
glaring.
So for me, when you're talking about the school, for me, it's not about the school doing anything, even
Right.
though we all wish someone would do something, right? That's the whole rescue me
But I think it's
mentality.
also identifying Jimmy's doing something bad,
Yes.
instead of saying, we know Jimmy's doing this, maybe there's something going on that you might wanna look into, or just, cause,
Right.
you know,
The
I feel like we're
referral.
also trying to focus on what's wrong right now.
Right.
We're gonna fix right
I think you're
now.
Yeah.
I see a lot of change. I mean, even in the 2 years
It's
I've
hard.
existed, it's all new. I see a lot of change. And one of the things that we've done, you know, and I don't take total credit, but some credit, is that we've tried to give all staff mandatory trauma-focused training so that they're actually not looking at, you know, your child as being a problem or a child as being a problem, but trying to look beyond that. And it's been quite shocking for them actually to go through that training. It's a completely different way
Yeah.
because they're trained to teach. You know, you know.
There's no
Teachers-
bad teacher.
Teachers teach.
There's
you know.
just a teacher
Right.
that's
It's
learned
just
what they
teaching.
know.
They have
and
their
teach them
time with their
something
kids, and they
else.
have times, and they have to control the kids, and they have to get them through a curriculum, and they have to get them tested, and they have to get out the other side. And to say to them, actually, you have to, you know, we would also like you to think about these children in a different way, and think about where they come from, and what that they are products of their environment. And by the way, you're a product of your environment, and
Yes.
therefore you have to use that when you're interacting with them. That's a big, big step in teaching, I think. I mean, Georgina,
Absolutely.
you could. You
Yeah,
know
no,
more
it's
about
true.
that, you
It's-
know more
Right.
about them.
Well, and teaching's become
Absolutely.
all-encompassing.
Yeah.
The one person who needs to be acknowledged as to who I'm recording this for is our prevention specialist at the school district. Her name's Courtney Dunn. So she requested this specifically to be recorded. So there's a lot of action towards trying to look at things differently.
Happening. I don't
Mhm.
disagree with your
Yeah.
assessment.
Oh, yeah, no,
But,
and
and
it's
we
not.
look to schools because they are authority in our community, and we
Right.
respect them, and we expect a lot from them, right? We want them to help turn out our
Right.
Ivy League kids and all those things we need
Right.
to have happen in Aspen. But
Yeah.
but at the same time, I think the limitations of many institutions, you know, it's important to recognise those.
Yes.
It's a community, so.
Yep. Well, that will be a part of this, is that wilderness is trying to break into mainstream where people just know us. We're finding the support avenues actually. Dr. Phil has put us on there probably 5 or 10 times on his show, just to let people know that there are things out there. But completing the circle, what I hear you saying is, no one told me about this. That's the referral. That's the education piece of, like, a lot of people have no idea that any of this actually exists. It's not part of their world.
I had no idea before I went into this, and I was a wilderness therapy counselor 25 years ago. It was very different then.
Very
So none of this was on my radar until I went through it personally.
Yeah.
And, you know, wilderness, when wilderness was first broached by our ed consultant, my reaction was, well, bad kids go to wilderness, and we don't have a bad kid. We have a kid with these issues. And then the learning process starts, and it's not bad kids. It's kids who need really to get out of this dynamic that they're in and get someplace where they can start to get a handle on what's going on with themselves.
Yes.
And yeah, they don't like you for the first couple weeks, that's for sure. You know, and the pictures that we got back showed a very sour young man, and somebody who didn't want to talk to us, somebody who did not want to respond to our letters, somebody who was, you know, and then it was like, okay, I'm just going to get through this. I'll do what they tell me to do. I'll do it. I'll work through it, and I'll be out of here in 6 weeks. And, you know, 13 weeks later, and I'm like, okay, when does this end? You know, school's going to start, you know, and then we're wrestling with the end of the program and what that means,
Yeah.
and the coming home part, and having to call Robert and say,
I know I talked about
gotta
the
talk to
Detroit
you.
airport.
Yeah.
It's all
You know,
good.
and all these things, but that awareness was not there, and you know, it's where you're from.
Yeah.
You know, I grew up in a place when I met Georgina and found out that she went to boarding school. Well, you know, the only
Traditional.
people, yeah, the only people who went to boarding school are the ones who stole cars or got pregnant. That's what I knew. And you
Yeah.
know,
You married me anyway.
I married her. And now look at me.
I just think in this community, what is tough is, when the kid maybe has gone through some of this and is ready to come home. I know that drugs and everything is everywhere, but I think it's really condoned in this community, and it's really hard to find those green light friends. They're gonna support
couple of yellow light friends will say, you can come to a party and I got your back and I'm gonna watch after you, but I'm still gonna smoke pot and I'm still gonna drink,
Yeah.
but I got your back.
Yeah, and when we get into.
That's a real tough, how do you get the parents and this community to kind of recognize that we've got a community problem?
Yes, well, that's part of the reason I think I'm being invited, because I'm here tonight talking just as an introduction, and there's already talk with organizations. I'm coming back to start doing a series of specific focus. This is what is going on, and this is how you can work with that, including things like that. Like, how do we look at changing a culture of an entire community?
And it's so tough in a community where it's kind of la la land play, because people are coming to have their good time, and
Yeah.
not a lot of people live in that perpetual, let's go out and
Well,
party.
it's gonna take partnership behind the scenes with organizations and parents coming together and saying, okay, this is what we're gonna be behind all of that. And this is what our kids are gonna come home to. Because if your kids are coming home to it, it becomes real.
And that's what I'm most interested in seeing all of you here. Like, what does that look like? That group who's interested in trying to have these conversations, and that's exactly what that fall one was like too. Whereas, we were all sitting around and we could see each other's faces and we could see that we were concerned.
Yeah.
So, or thinking about what it is that we needed to think about differently, even if it wasn't true concern yet. So,
And I'll just throw at you just something to think about. In a lot of this context in similar situations, the answer is usually found in mentorship, where you create the scenario within the family dynamic and for your kid, where they end up not going to green light friends and looking for green light friends, because guess what? There might not be a single one right now. But if we work them into a higher bracket on the hierarchy of social dynamic, where, how old is the kid?
He'll be 17.
17, okay, then we're looking for 21-year-olds. 21, 22, in that dynamic where he wants to become them, and he's going to go hang out with them. Because we've identified these individuals as they have a job, they're in school, they're doing well, all these things. We're gonna build that dynamic in. And that big part of that is mentorship. By the way, Georgina doesn't know this, I've hired and I have a person that I've worked with for about 15 years, who now lives in Paonia area with me, and her work is all mentorship. So she's coming and working with the kids. Okay, I'm mostly parents, my team is mostly parents, but we do some work with kids. But as far as a resource for the community, Medina Ryan, who's her name, her company is WildEdge.com. It's a coaching company working in the capacity of how do we do what I'm saying to you? How do you show up and build relationship where they want to become you? They want to work in that direction, in that dynamic.
Versus staying stuck,
That's right.
or coming back to the way it was.
So
I mean,
another
you
resource.
can have that whole home team and change your home environment, but it's still, if you're coming back to Aspen High School, you're afraid to go in the bathroom because people are
Yes.
constantly.
Yep.
I mean, and that's a problem. And
Yep.
so how do we address those issues?
Yep.
Where our kids not gonna be put in that environment?
Right.
What other choice do we
Well, it's not
have?
about not being put in that environment. It's about changing their reaction to it.
Right.
And that's a much longer conversation than we have time for tonight.
Right.
That's one of the things, like, we can break that down by individual families. Because again, it's not a magic, like, do this for all these kids and that will change. It's this kid, we're gonna have to do this. And this kid, that. And they have to be different, because if you try the same thing, they see right through it. Right through it. I mean, they're like, stop that therapy bullshit. I hear that so often. Sorry if that offends anyone, but that's what they say.
Yeah.
Et cetera.
Totally get it.
You,
I'm going way back and kind of lower level, but
Go ahead.
you had said wilderness is not just for, you said, for bad kids. Like, what is the spectrum of who goes to wilderness?
I'm gonna tell you, everyone goes to wilderness.